2, 1.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Frugal Females Challenge. My name is Heather Young. Thank you so much for joining our Frugal Females Challenge Live. This season we are lucky enough to be working with Rachel Alexandria. She is our conflict resolution, conflict preparation expert. She has many years in a psychotherapy therapist kind of background, so she's going to be here helping us unpack how to have conflict conversations from a position of power. I love how you say this. You can handle conflict with more confidence and grace.
Yep, I'm glad to be here.
Yay.
And I'm really happy to be here as a consultant for everyone and help you have money conversations with a bit more ease and preparation, like being able to do it in a relaxed and confident fashion.
Excellent. Thank you so much again for being here. I really appreciate that. So this has been a topic that has come up, and I feel like this is the right time to have it. I feel like we've been waiting for someone with your experience and expertise to kind of help us tease this out, and I'm really actually very thankful. Just so you guys know, I've also been practicing what her recommendations have been, and it has actually made a big difference just in my personal life. So I just want to say thank you for also influencing positively in my world already.
You're welcome. I'm glad.
Thank you. So Rachel's book is called Woman Overboard. You can find it on Kindle, and I just really appreciated how you were able to kind of shed light on the different ways that people approach conflict. And I'm sure it's intuitive, but for some reason I never really put it together that people respond to conflict differently. In your experience, kind of what are the different flavors?
So when I wrote the book, because I was really trying to navigate my own experience of conflict and how that was challenging for me, and I used to just avoid it entirely. So as I was workshopping methods about how to deal with it, I also saw that there were these different ways that people skirt around or kind of barrel through conflict. And so I came up with 6 ways, and I haven't ever found any more than those 6. And I'm going to see if I have them by memory. Self-flagellation, like beating yourself up, thinking everything's your fault, trying to make everything your fault so that the other person will calm down. Blame, distraction, overwhelm.
I think passive-aggressive was my
Passive-aggressive and shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mine used to be self-flagellation and shutdown. Those were mine. Like, I'm going to beat myself up and I'm just going to like turn off internally, like just go fully numb so that I can't say anything hurtful and I'm not as triggered by their stuff and I'm just kind of not even here, but it's a really cold and lonely place.
Yeah, and I can think about my family primarily kind of came to mind when we were reading about these things, and then it made it much easier to understand, oh, okay, yes, I've seen them do this in our conversations, and mine was a mix of passive-aggressive and blame. And I really don't like to be kind of caught off guard, and so I guess that's where the blame came in. What was it my fault? I didn't know this. Or just being pretty aggressive in my communication rather than kind of owning my truth and speaking that truth. And unfortunately that happens in my intimate relationships. I think that I was reading on CNBC recently is something like between 30 and 35% of intimate relationships end because of money.
Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, when I was in training as a therapist, what they would always say is people fight about 2 things. They fight about sex and they fight about money.
Oh, yep, there you go.
Because they're the most vulnerable places for us.
Yes.
The places where like maybe our unexpressed desires show up, our really personal, challenging places inside, and we have to somehow be transparent or get our partner to follow along or something with it. So yeah, they're places where people have probably their biggest unmet needs and their biggest secrets. And so learning to talk about those openly is important.
Man, and the impact, like when one of those triggers kind of comes up, those inadvertent triggers, that panic, like it sets in and just so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all my ex-husband had to do was start talking about money or like being worried that I wasn't making enough money, and I'd be like, oh God, like all the shame and all the overwhelm, everything pops up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's, you have this phrase in the book, and I think maybe you might have been quoting somebody else, but somewhere in there it was like you have maybe a quarter of a second to catch your response before.
Yeah. So that was Tara Goldman something. She's the daughter of Daniel Goleman, who is a preeminent researcher and writer in psychology. And she says, so there's this book called Emotional Alchemy, and she talks about this like quarter second when you can catch kind of the information that's flowing into your brain. And because when we first get data, we get incomplete data. Data passes, like, and by data I just mean, you know, somebody says something, you hear a noise, you see a thing, there's a little bit of data. And then it comes into the brain, like primarily to the sort of the reptile brain is what we learned about, which is not the technical term, but like the part of the brain that's developed that triggers your fight or flight. That's the first place data gets to. And so if you don't catch it there as it hits and your nervous system kind of goes, attention, if you don't catch it right then, your reactions blossom like within a second or two. And dialing back things down after you've already started reacting takes more work. It takes more labor and can be much harder than if you catch it. You're like, ooh, I just got triggered. Let me take a breath. Let me stay curious. Let me stay open. Let me track like, okay, I get a part of me's triggered, but let me see what else is going on. So that's what she would talk about, is that magical second. So that's what I'm always trying to help people do, is like, usually it'll be like, oh, 3 days later, I realized I was triggered, or, you know, a week later, a month later, this is what I should have said. This is what was happening. And let's get the clock to, or the amount of time to scale back and back and back until you can catch it in the moment. Because when you catch that, then you have options, right? When you catch your trigger as it's happening, then you can choose to take a breath and choose to resource yourself, or maybe even be prepared ahead of time. Like that's what I teach now, is how do you just know ahead of time what your triggers are, so when they happen, it's just like we all learned what to do when there's a fire. If you catch on fire, what do?
Stop, drop, and roll.
Exactly. Someone made that plan. And so now you don't think about it. It's just triggered in your head.
Yes.
And so when we learn about what are our little hot spots, then you can just know that and be like, oop, that situation just popped up. I have a plan already. I know to stop, drop, and roll because it's a fire.
And I love it. You give a few different steps. I think you kind of break them into 4 kind of categories on this wheel: the warning, the trigger, the resources, and then the intervention. So that's like my plan.
Yeah, I built this whole system. I call it the self-rescue system. It's all talked about in Woman Overboard. And so it's basically taking any situation at a time when you're not already triggered and like sitting down and going through it. There's actually three little fill out sections per quadrant. So like, what are your triggers? What are the warning signs of those happening? And what specifically is the fear underneath it? And then resources is like, how do you resource yourself for when the trigger happens? Like, how do you not get bowled over, basically? And intervention is, what do you want to do to take action to shift that moment, to take your power back, to take control?
That was, and so guys, just so you know, I recently had to buy a new car, so it was relevant to my situation. And it really did work. So I was doing,
Because buying a car triggers you, or like dealing with
money. Yeah, sorry, we're in the Frugal Females Challenge group.
Yeah.
Money is important, and that's a personal trigger for me. I'm, my family, we always had, but there was 4 of us on a pretty limited income. So my background was being resourceful, and then I was in a abusive relationship where someone was stealing money from me all the time. And then just through lack of knowledge, being naive and young, and having access to student loan debt and things like that. I'm just really suspicious, and money is a pretty solid trigger for me. So having to buy big ticket items is a huge deal, especially cars. So I had to didn't realize I was bringing all of that to the table. When I was having conflicting conversations with my significant other, with my mom or my dad or my brother or my friends, and I'm trying to advise them, and I didn't realize that I was bringing all of this distrust or all of this suspicion. My mantra was that you can't trust people with your money because they're going to screw you over.
Your negative mantra.
That was my negative mantra, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that I was telling myself that story.
Yeah, that's something I talk about in the book. So just to fill people in the triggers section, we're full of information we want to share.
Info.
So I say when you realize what your trigger is, then you want to dial in and be like, what's the thing you keep saying in your head over and over? What's the negative thing you keep saying? And so that was yours, without even realizing it. You can't trust people around money; they're gonna screw you over.
Yes.
Which probably also makes you nervous and tense when you deal with any situation with money, because you're always like, how are you out to screw me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also puts people ill at ease when you're dealing with them. So they are also like, this doesn't feel like a trusting, easy conversation.
And it sounds like it's not an easy conversation for a lot of people too.
Yeah, no, not usually.
So if I am understanding correctly, in order to approach a conflict, whether or not it's a conversation or however, right, we have some personal responsibility to understand what our triggers are.
Yeah. And what I say is, if you're afraid of conflict, if you're there's conversations that you have to have, but you're scared to have them, even if the person you're going to have them with is a totally reasonable, loving person, but it's still just anxiety producing, what you need is a plan. That's the antidote to conflict avoidance and fear, is conflict preparation. You need to have a plan. So that's what the book talks about, and that's what we're here to help give you information about how to do. How do you make a plan ahead of time so that you can make the conflict less scary? Because part of what makes it scary, I think, is we're worried we're going to get triggered, we're going to get in that reactivity state, and then who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what terrible thing I'll say or they'll say, or we'll start yelling, or we'll feel frozen, right? It's those 6 ways, right? I'll get passive aggressive, I'll get blamey, I'll shut down, I'll start beating myself up and feel terrible, I'll just get overwhelmed or distracted.
So we have these physiological responses. What is a physiological response?
So think about any difficult conflict that you're going to have with somebody. Think about having to talk with your partner about money. Think about having to talk with your partner about money, or your mom or your dad or something like that. A lot of people have different values than their family did about how you spend. And you might, if you're paying attention to your body, take a moment and tune in when you think about that. I'm about to bring that person in the room and you're going to have to tell them how you're spending your money. And then there's right? So a lot of times it's stomach tension, your stomach will tighten up or feel uneasy or even nauseous. You might get flushed. You might have your throat constriction, or just start to feel really foggy in your mind. So all of those are body responses, physiological responses. I was just I've been listening to snippets of Brene Brown's Dare to Lead, because we all love Brene Brown. And I love how she's a researcher and she brings that scientific stuff to the psychology. And she says, we call emotions feelings because we feel them. We feel them in our bodies. Not everyone's paying attention to it, but I promise you, if you start to listen, it's there. It's there before you're even aware of what the feeling is most of the time. Even before someone knows they're anxious, their stomach's in knots. And that's what kids will say. They don't say, I feel anxious or I feel scared. They'll say, my tummy hurts.
That's true. And so some of these responses, same with me, I get this knot and I tense up. And so you offered a suggestion of power posing, or taking a few really deep breaths, getting grounded something about treading light when we're grounded. It was wonderful.
I don't even remember, but it sounds brilliant.
Yes. So we have these physiological responses. We can kind of own that pause when we're preparing for this, and then take those deep breaths. Or some people like to take their shoes and socks off, and then just
feel your feet on the ground. So that's part of the plan that you make. If you realize how your body feels when you get triggered, then you can make a plan to resource yourself when that happens. So if I know I'm going to get triggered when I'm into this conversation, I'm going to plan ahead for, I'm not going to want to be like curled up in a small ball on the couch when we talk about it, because that'll make me feel small and powerless. So how about if I am walking around? So for example, whenever I know I have to have a difficult conversation on the phone, I get on my headset and I'm walking around my apartment, because walking helps me feel like I have freedom, like I have options, like I'm mobile. And it just gives my body the signal that I can take action or run if I need to, even though that's not what I'm going to do. When you resource your body in that feeling, it relaxes. It can tell. It's like, okay, I'm not stuck. I'm not trapped. I don't, it's just giving supportive signals to the mind. Like, okay, we're not stuck. We're not trapped. We're okay. We're moving. It's good.
So then, once you kind of address your body, then you pause for a minute and see what's going on in here.
Yeah, I talk about the power pause actually these days. When I describe, we all have the ability to have a neutral inner observer. That's that little part in your head that's like, are we sure this is a good idea? Let's reflect on this. What's really happening right now? Some of us listen to that more than others, and I invite everyone to cultivate more of that. I bet when you read the book, you started getting more information from that place in your mind.
Yeah.
Right?
Like that little guy, it's kind of like not quite the conscious on their or your conscience on your shoulder, but okay, I can see my breath is tightening.
Yeah, just like if you had a camera inside your head and it would just neutrally recording what's happening right now. So when you can start to resource your body and be calm, then you can start to listen. Okay, what's happening? And that's how you noticed, I'm having this negative mantra, this thought that keeps running through my head. Everyone's out to screw me and take my money. Well, okay, that's probably not true, but boy, I'm sure having this thought over and over. So this is something that can come up with meditation, the kind where you're not supposed to push away your thoughts, but just where you're listening to your thoughts. So when you can observe those, then you can make a plan to create something different. What I say when you're making a conflict preparation plan, you need to deliberately give your body and your mind things to do, because that's how you prevent being in a reactive pattern. So, asking our cameraman, is everything okay? Okay. So, they say that nature abhors a vacuum, right? So you can try all you want to not do something, like I don't want to react this way, but if you're focused on, I just don't want to do this, that's not going to be very functional. Instead, you have to put in place something else. So instead of like getting small and shutting down like I used to, I'm up and I'm walking. Instead of having a thought of, everyone's out to get me and my money and to screw me, you have to put in a positive mantra like, I don't know did you come up with one for yourself?
I don't know if this was an affirmation or a mantra, but that I can be smart and competent in my money, dealings. It's kind of a rough sketch, but but the ultimate kind of feeling is I can be smart and confident in these kind of transactions.
Yeah. So if I were going to modify that, because I make a point in the book, and this is sort of a nuanced issue, for me personally, I'm not in love with affirmations because they're sort of future projecting, and it's easy for our inner critics to be like, but that's not true. So what I like is to make statements that can't be denied.
Okay.
Like, I trust myself. I trust my research, and like I trust my ability to be smart and research and be prepared when I head into these conversations. So,
now I cannot deny that. I'm not saying that I'm the smartest, but I can trust that I will give my best effort in doing something. Like having my numbers, knowing what my interest rate is beforehand, getting pre-approved, knowing what all the factors are in my life, that if I do, can I absorb this thing, whatever. So that course correction really feels true to me.
Yeah, and did you see how she like suddenly got like, oh yeah,
I can do this.
I do know that. I do trust that. Like, it just feels true. And so that's what we put in place of everyone's out to screw me. Well, it doesn't matter because I trust that I know what I know. I trust I did my research, and these are the things that I know. And I came into this conversation prepared. I can trust that.
So do you think like it's fair to like schedule time to have these difficult conversations with your significant other?
As opposed to
like, hey, let's talk about money because this came up right now.
Well, I think it depends on the couple. You know, some people may be fine with it, but generally, I think people don't respond well to having a bomb dropped on them.
Right.
So, like, if you're, unless your partner is really easygoing about money, maybe they are, I don't know. If it's not a point, I mean, but we're talking about this because people are mostly freaked out by it, right?
Yeah.
So I think the idea is like, hey, I'd like for us to go over our finances. I know that this is maybe not the most fun for either of us, and we might both have some spots that feel rough. So what if we make a plan to like do this, or like go out to dinner or something nice, and then come home, and over a glass of wine, you know, we can just start to get into it, or maybe we can both sit down with some numbers and agree to be as non-judgmental as possible, like using I language and stuff, but it gives people a chance to prepare. That's what we're talking about, right? I mean, you've taken the time to prepare, so it's only fair that you don't come in with like, I have this whole conflict preparation plan ready, and your spouse is sitting down and turning on the game, and you're like, let's talk about money.
Yeah,
like,
probably not the best time. But I like that this is kind of also leading to another area in your book that you talk about these dials. Dial up the power, dial up the...
So that's in the intervention part. So after you've resourced yourself, what I learned was, the whole reason I wrote this book really was because there were lots of conflict things that would talk about how to have conflict conversations. And then there's therapy, which tells you kind of how to get a hold of yourself and calm down. But there wasn't really something that meshed those together. Like, how do I take care of my inner self and get to a place where I can actually do those great nonviolent communication practices, you know? So intervention is the part where, because I was really used to like self-soothing and, okay, I'm in a conflict moment and I'm sort of sitting in the boat I've made for myself because I've been throwing it awash overboard and but I was like, oh, how do I then get out of this? How do I steer into, you know, just basically become the captain of my own ship? And so intervening, like that's the part in the plan where you're like, okay. So I talk about three things. I talk about you need to know what your goal is, you know. So there's really only three conversational goals, in my opinion. It's to connect. It's like, so for getting better connection, negotiation, or protection. And I think of them as like a stack. So you have a primary and then a secondary. Depending on how things go, those goals will shift around. But you come in with a primary, like, is your partner kind of combative or do they easily get triggered? Protection's probably your first goal, and then maybe connection. It depends. Like if your mom's super judgy, you know, protection is going to be your top. But if, say, you're trying to, like, your partner's, I don't know, more engineer type and not especially emotional and just kind of wants to know the facts, well, then you're coming in at a negotiation place, like talking about, I don't know, what kind of car you're going to get or something like that. So when you know your goal, it's easier to strategize how you approach everything from there, right? Like, it's just like, what are you going to wear out? Well, are we going to the farm? Are we going out for dinner? Are we going to a movie? I need to know ahead of time, and that's how I'll dress myself. So that's how we come up with the dials. So the dials are how I talk about, and I know this is a lot of information, but all of it's in the book if you want to get the book. And we're going to be open for a lot of questions after this. So we're just giving you pieces that will be helpful, hopefully, in your journey. I call the dials the adaptive dials of communication, I think. They probably need a better name. But I figured out that a lot of people approach life like, I don't know, their radio. Like, you set the settings once for the bass and the treble, and then all you ever do is adjust the volume. Like, you don't really, unless you're like a total audiophile, you don't ever really change it, right? So people go through life like that. They address everyone and everything with basically the same tactics, most of us. And so coming into a difficult conversation that's where we want connection versus protection, you can't have the same tactics. You kind of have to shift how you show up. So I figured out that for me, I'm always kind of shifting around. Like, how do I do that? What are the things I'm doing that with? So I figured that there are these 4 dials. Like, instead of bass and treble, what you have is charm, power, compassion, and authenticity. So in a protection conversation, for example, authenticity is usually lower. A lot of us, at least I'll speak for myself and a lot of sort of good girls, we tend to open up with authenticity thinking that that's going to make somebody feel warmer toward me and less likely to yell at me and more understanding of my position. No, sometimes yes, but a lot of the times there's people who can't receive that, who don't hear it, who feel like it's manipulative, or who will take it and use it against us. And there's just people who don't need that part of the information. So authenticity is great in a connection goal conversation, but in a protection one, not so much. And I realized charm is something that I use when it's somebody I don't know very well and I'm just trying to smooth over what could be an awkward interaction. Like, oh, I accidentally, ran into your shopping cart with my shopping cart. I'm going to amp up the charm. I'm not going to be like, oh my gosh, I totally didn't see you, blah, blah, blah about my day. This lady doesn't care. I'm just going to be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm such a nerd. Ha ha ha. Bye.
Yeah.
And compassion is a thing that can be dialed up or dialed down based on whether or not you can trust the person to respond positively. And power is something that I think a lot of women may not think of, but power doesn't have to be power over, it's just strength and confidence. And so in protection conversations, my power dial's way up. It's not about aggression, it's just about being very clear about where my lines are and what's going to be okay and what's not okay. And you can probably tell from how I'm presenting the different feelings.
In my experience, I just didn't realize I had my power dial like up on extra high at all times in all areas of life. At work, everybody teases me about coming in hot because I'm fairly, joking and I'm, self-deprecating humor and things like that. So I guess I charm people too, but equally as much as my power dial. And I'm realizing that those types of dynamics don't always apply, especially in personal relationships with loved ones, when you're trying to combine, or when you're even just talking about different goals for you or for some friend of yours or something, totally resonated with me. And I'm gonna start tweaking a little more, but I do find myself, and I have a little sticky up by my desk. So okay, where am I at today? And I got my little dials there, on my Post-it.
That's awesome.
Because like you said, if you don't put something in the place of, if I'm gonna stop drinking coffee, the behavior of me drinking something is still there. But maybe if I always have my water bottle in hand, then I don't need to worry about failing so hard because there's something proactive that I'm doing in its place.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way we change is by putting things into practice. And so I love that you have a sticky up. I have stickies up for things that I'm practicing all the time.
All the time, yeah. It's really helpful, guys. Just think about that. Power, compassion, charm, and authenticity. So those are the different kind of dials, just again. So yeah, I get a lot of, when I've been talking to people, kind of what their questions were, it's just not so much of how do I approach this particular thing or that particular thing, but it's like, hey, I'm completely deer in a headlight. Now I know that they're still at step one, they're in shutdown mode.
Or overwhelmed.
Or overwhelmed, right? I don't even know how to have this, or we can't have this discussion without yelling and screaming all the time.
And both of those are trigger reactions. It's just one's fight and one's flight, really, or freeze.
So, so just some like things that we can do to prepare. You're talking about conflict preparation. So scheduling out, doing power poses, things like that. Is there anything else that you would recommend?
I think really knowing the goal of the conversation, like we talked about. So making these plans ahead of time, like journaling these things out. Another one is knowing your deal breakers, because if you go into any difficult conversation without understanding what is and isn't okay for you, you can find yourself way beyond your crossed lines, and then that's when the yelling happens, right? So, and maybe it's yelling. I mean, for me, one of my deal breakers is calling names and yelling. I don't need to have that in and it's not a judgment of folks where they grew up like that, or that's normal, or that both of them are happy to do it that way. It really doesn't work for me. It just so triggers my inner child that I'm just like, no. So my deal breaker is if we can't have this conversation without voices getting raised or active, like things like that, or if one or both of us start feeling like we want to call names or do character slams, it's time to step back and calm down, each of us, and maybe go do your own process and come back when we're ready to have the conversation in a more calm way. But sometimes the deal breaker might be something like so you went to buy this car, for example, and you went in with this better positive mantra of I trust my research, I trust my expertise in what I looked up, and that I know everything that I need to know for what I want, because there is a finite amount of data, and I've looked up what I need. But I imagine you also had deal breakers.
Yeah, so I mean, if I couldn't get so much value for my trade-in, if I couldn't get my pre-approved, if they weren't going to honor my pre-approved interest rate, that wasn't going to be the price per month. So I definitely did have a criteria. So my deal breakers in our conversation could be things like volume, language being used. I think for me personally, it's autonomy. If somebody else can't be responsible for their stuff, then I can't be responsible for that either. And so that's kind of a deal breaker for me.
Yeah, and it might be just about when to walk away from the conversation. So with the car example, you're like, well, if you're not going to honor my pre-approved interest rate, I'm out of here. And I think some folks may be afraid to walk away, but the truth is, if you walk away early, once you're approaching that deal breaking line, it's only going to serve you better. It's going to stop you from getting reactive, and then you have time to contemplate and readdress something or make a different choice.
And I love that in your book you call it this female archetype of the good girl, someone that resonated with me, probably not as much now, but I could see in my recent past, like the pleaser, unable or afraid to kind of speak or own your truth. So deal breakers, I think, are completely on the table. Like, it's okay to want to please people if that's your natural thing, but you can't please others from a place of depletion.
No, yeah, and that's the thing is, I hate this saying, but it's just coming to mind. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So if you don't stand up for yourself, you'll find yourself again way transgressed over. That's just something that happens, partly because my experience is pleasers tend to get into connection with takers. So I've had to learn how to identify that early and just be like, oop, no. Like for me, one of my deal breakers now is like, oh, if you can't have, I think it's similar to yours, if you can't have a conversation with me where you can own your part of it, you don't have to agree with me about what your part is, but if you can't be like, ooh, I did do something here and I do want to look at that or work on that, If a person's not able to do that, that's not a person I want to continue to be having that conversation with. But yeah, deal breakers can even be just about the conversation. Like if we can't, maybe in a money conversation, like this might be a good tactic. If we can't come to an agreement in the next 15 minutes, like maybe we'll set a timer and we'll just see what we can work out. And it's been 15 minutes, then we'll take a step back, take a breath, go get a bite of food. Maybe we'll come back to it, you know. So a deal breaker doesn't have to be about walking away from a relationship. It could just be about setting limits and honoring those set limits because you know that they help you be at your best.
And that's like, I've observed that people are making these kinds of negotiations in the way that they approach their money management skills. In, you know, maybe if one person is more of a spender than the other is more of a saver, having those different accounts with a joint account for those shared bills.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to worry and panic about the other one's like spending habits. You can have those negotiations or have those, what am I called? Compromise, that's the word.
And I love that. I personally, that's, you know, the next time I'm in a relationship, that's actually my plan is like, let's agree upon how we share the bills, and there's one account for that, and we each pay it equally, and then you do whatever you want with the rest of your money, because it's your money, and the rest of the money that I make is my money, and maybe we have another joint account for, you know, paying toward our dream vacation or something like that.
Honeymoon, houses, whatever, college funds, and then you have this, I don't want to say magic phrase, but it's a good phrase to start off with. I feel blank because blank and want blank. So I don't have a board to show you guys, but essentially, could you just break that sentence down for us?
Sure. Well, so when I found I was teaching this method to people, they still were stymied about what to say. And this is actually work I'm continuing to develop. Like what are the phrases? What are things that you can say that are true without being accusatory or coming off as judgmental or patronizing or condescending? And so this is a template for how to build things like that. So it's essentially using I language, like focusing it right here. And some of you who've done any kind of counseling will know this. So I feel, so an emotion is what should go in here somewhere, not, I feel like you're terrible with money. That's not a feeling. That's a thought, and it's also a judgment. So I feel scared would be a common one. Like I feel scared because I think, or you know, I think could be changed with I'm worried, or I see, or I tell the story that like I'm scared because I think that, you know, we have very different goals and values around money, and what I need is for us to find some kind of common ground that we can agree on. Right? So that's a way to fill in those blanks. I feel blank because I think, or I see, or I assess, or the story I tell myself is, and then a statement about your need, because sometimes that's the thing that people forget, is to make a request. You know, here's something about what I need to come from this. This is why I'm telling you. Like maybe I just need you to hear me.
I feel suspicious because I have been sold a car for more than it was worth, and I want a fair deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And that might just be something that's in your head, you know, but maybe if a salesman's not getting where you're coming from and you feel like you want to offer a little authenticity, you could say that, like, yeah, this is where I come from.
That poor guy, and he really did a really good job. And thank goodness he had like some sort of, I think he had a Bible verse like posted on his monitor or something. So then I was like tuning in to my compassion dial a little bit more with that. And It was like, okay, he's a person, he has some sort of conscience. I believe that to be true. So I can like rein back on my mistrust a little bit.
You don't need to come in like this.
I was definitely coming in hot. So there was a fair bit of breathing. There's a fair bit of just withholding a lot more verbally. I'm a pretty natural communicator, and so I was like a little less on the talkative side and a little more, this is what I need, and let him kind of show me. And it was a complete paradigm shift, honestly, but it was good. It was good. I really appreciate that. Well, thank you so much again. Now, you have recently you had a new launch, and you are tapping for your type. What does that mean these days? It's also really good.
I make so many products. This is a totally different thing, but for those of you who know what the Enneagram is, if you don't, it's like two different things that I'm going to have to explain. But the Enneagram is a personality type system, and we recently did a typing assessment for Heather and figured out her type, and that's actually on my site. If you go to rachelalexandria.com/findmytype, you can find the video where we did her typing assessment.
Yeah, that was fun.
She's like, oh God, people are going to see it.
But it was cool because then each person kind of brings a certain energy to the table.
Yeah, the Enneagram describes what motivates us and how, like, some of how we show up in the world, but really more than anything, the energy that we carry in the world. So I've found it over my lifetime of professionally helping people and understanding myself and in the world, to be super helpful, and helps me have more compassion for the different ways people show up and why they're not all like me and don't just do things that make sense to me. It's because there's 9 different types. So if you know the Enneagram, I've made this product that uses EFT tapping, which is tapping on meridian points, like acupressure points, to basically calm down the nervous system while you're talking about aspects that resonate for your particular type. This makes a lot of sense if you know the Enneagram.
But that is also good, because then when we're talking about vacuums, right, a way to flip my physiological response to conflict then could be to
tapping, for sure.
do a few of these, like...
Yeah. Points are here, 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 and here. I actually have a graphic wearing this exact same shirt of all the tapping points. And I ended up writing a book. I didn't tell you this. I don't know if you saw on Facebook. Because folks, when I was introducing this to Enneagram, like, geeks, basically.
I love that phrase.
Yeah. Enneagram nerds. Then they were like, well, what's this tapping thing? Tapping is a therapeutic type of modality that you can use on yourself. And so they were like, well, what is it? Where does it come from? All the Enneagram 6s out there were like, is that really a thing? What is this? That seems like nonsense. Okay. So I ended up writing a book called Tapping Made Easy, and that's just for brand newbies. And then I have a little video that shows me doing the tapping points that goes along with that. So that's, if you're interested in tapping itself, like tapping around money, you can just Google that, you'll find stuff. Tapping around anxiety, you will definitely find videos. But if you're interested in the how-to book, which also includes a section on how to make up your own scripts, because that's what I'm saying, like, I'm getting into this languaging thing now. I realize people have a hard time doing it on their own. They're like, I do it with my therapist or my practitioner or with my friend, but on my own, it's like, what do I say to sort of get into that deep material and make it feel better? So I have this list of kind of the 4 phases you go through while you're tapping.